Marketer of the Day, Episode 621. Succeed by failing 90% of the time. Pay attention to what's working and apply the 80-20 rule to your productivity, Google Ads, and Facebook ads with Perry Marshall.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We are here with somewhat of an internet celebrity, the man, the myth, the legend, Perry Marshall. And if you heard anything about this thing called the Pareto Principle 80-20, which basically means that we need to narrow down our focus and actually put our time and energy into those things that make money and let the other wastes of time fall by the wayside, then you're going to want to sit up and pay very close attention to Mr. Perry Marshall. He's an expert on 80-20. He's an expert on pay-per-click and Google AdWords. So how the heck are you today, Perry?
I'm great. It's a very cold winter day in Chicago with lots of snow, and it's warm in my house. So I'm very happy about that.
Awesome. So out there in most of the world, it's cold, but in your tiny little nook, it's nice and warm where you like to be at.
That's right. My man cave, it's 70 degrees and sunny. So thanks for having me on. Really excited to be here and be entertaining your listeners and hopefully putting some money in their pockets and freeing some time to things that things they'd rather do. I think we all have things we'd rather do than have our nose to the grindstone all the time. So great to be here.
Yeah, I mean, glad to have you. And yeah, you're right. We can all relate to feeling like we just have so much on the to-do list, and we're just like putting out all the fires, and we don't have any time to actually think about next steps or strategy or about big picture stuff. And, we could all use a break, or we could all use some sort of that kind of re-optimization. So as far as you're concerned, I've heard about you again and again for years and years, and I'm sure that maybe some people out there have heard of you, but they might not be fully dialed into what you have going on. So can you give us a little bit of like a quick kind of recap of what you do and what makes you stand out, what makes you special?
So I'm known as the guy that wrote the book on Google AdWords and also co-authored the world's best-selling book on Facebook advertising. So we've helped an awful lot of people get more traffic to their websites online. It all started because I had an engineering job, and when my wife was 3 months pregnant, I got laid off. And we were planning on bringing her home from work and her being a full-time mom. And so the pressure was on. And I ended up going into sales for several reasons. One was I could stay in engineering, but I'd have to move out of Chicago. And the other reason was I wasn't really going to make enough money as an engineer to support us anyway, which was kind of a rude awakening after I got out of school and I was all excited about, man, engineers are rich. We had, this kind of idea, and it wasn't really the case. And when you're in a city with a high cost of living like Chicago, then you really feel the pinch. And so I kind of got thrown out of the frying pan into the fire. And I had the privilege of experiencing a couple of years of bologna sandwiches and ramen soup and spiraling credit card debt. And it was really exciting. And that first sales job, the people I worked for were great people, but it just wasn't the right match. And over and over, I would try to put these deals together, and they would always fall apart for some reason. Some manufacturer couldn't support what we were trying to do, or somebody wouldn't keep a promise. And so at the end of 2 years, I was really battered and bruised and hurting really bad. And then I got fired. And so, in fact, it was right around this time of year. It was right before Thanksgiving. And I walk into the office and hey, Perry, can I talk to you for a minute? And you ever just had a feeling that this is not going to be a good conversation?
Yeah, that impending sense of doom.
I had the impending sense of doom, and I go in there and he says, okay, we're done. And so I get back in the car and I drive an hour back to my house. So, 2 hours on the road with a 5-minute firing in between. And I walk in the door and Laura goes, "You got fired, didn't you?" Yeah. I got fired. So it's like, and at this point, like, man, I really have to make this work. Like, I seriously have to make this work, because if this screws up, there isn't going to be no other second chance. Like some serious bone crunching metal is going to happen if this the next step doesn't work out. Well, I had interviewed the previous week at this other job, and I managed to get that job without them finding out that I'd gotten fired from the first job in the meanwhile. And the other thing that happened was 6 months before that, I had stumbled into a big coliseum where they were having this giant motivational success seminar. And the last guy to talk that day was Dan Kennedy. And he was talking about not making cold calls, not pounding the pavement, using low-cost direct response advertising to get people to seek you instead of you being an annoying pest. And Dan levitated $300 out of my wallet, which was a minor miracle considering it was probably the last credit card that had any room on it. And I took home this toolkit of marketing ideas, which I had never been exposed to before. And so my current boss was completely uninterested in anything like that. But I spent about 6 months studying all that stuff and finding little ways to try it out and use it. And then I get this new job. Well, the new job, they had a website. And this was in 97. And the web hadn't really taken off yet. It was still early adopter for, and engineers were using it, and we were selling it to engineers. And so I take this new job, and nobody really told me this, but I figured out that websites and lead generation was pretty much the same as direct mail. It was only it was on a screen instead of a piece of paper, but it was pretty much the same thing. And I started studying the classic marketers and putting two and two together. And we started generating leads, and the phone calls started coming in, and I wasn't chasing people around all over the place. They were actually coming to us, and I would talk to people on the phone, and they would be happy to talk to me, which was like, I really can't explain to you how radical of a concept that was. It was better than any therapy. Like, wow, I'm going to work today, and there's going to be people who actually want to talk to me. Wow. And that's really where I come from, is being that guy, you know, with a 1-year-old baby at home, and like, man, if we max out any more credit cards, we're going to start missing mortgage payments, and then we're going to be in serious trouble. That's me.
So it sounds like you got toughened up quite a bit, and like when you're explaining like, oh, this bad thing and that bad thing happened, it makes me think of, you know, there are so many people out there who only kind of have one foot in their online business, right? They have somewhat of a cushion, they have somewhat of some other income, and that's a fine thing to have, but it's like that keeps people from really taking those risks, or really being backed into a corner, or maybe going all in with their business. And so like I can relate to a lot of those sort of bad things that happen. It seems like, you know, nothing's quite going your way, but then it toughens you up and it gets you to the point that you need to go. And it seems like from your story, and I flipped through your book the other day as well, it seems like a big like repeat concept with you is not making things so hard on ourselves, right? It seems like there's that temptation to find something new and say, oh, well, you know, I should be sending out lump email, or I should be, you know, focusing on cold calls. And it seems like a lot of us out there already have kind of the low-hanging fruit in place, right? We have that existing customer list that we could send an email blast to, or send a direct mail campaign to, or set up an opt-in page and send some ads to it, instead of fighting that uphill battle and doing it the hard way with those cold calls.
You know, I think it comes down to discerning when is it that you need to head into the wind, and and just defy all the odds? And when is it that you need to go with the current? There isn't really anything in marketing that doesn't coincide with existing trends, existing currents, existing natural forces in the marketplace. Anything that works in marketing works because you're harmonizing with some larger forces out there, and all you're doing is directing it or steering it a little bit, okay? But at the same time, there are times when you have to recognize, hey, I got to take the high road. I got to go like straight up the hill here. So like with my wife coming home from work, I mean, that was the anvil that I was up against. It was like, okay, I really do not want her to have to get a job. And on top of that, if she had to get a job, it wouldn't net us that much more money, and it would tremendously complicate our life. You know what I'm saying? Right. Sure. So after you pay daycare and all that, like you're not really coming out ahead, right? It's like, Perry, you have to make this work somehow, right? And I could have backed down from that and tried to take an easy route, but I don't think it would be an easy route. And maybe that's just it right there. Is when is the easy route not actually the easy route because you're just avoiding the inevitable, right? That's one thing versus when is the easy route, frankly, the route you should take, because the hard route is just self-punishment, right? Like, the bank teller doesn't care where you got your check or how easy or hard it was, or whether you're, digging coal out of coal mines with your bare fingers, or whether you used a steam shovel, or whether you just, did something on the stock market. Like, they don't care. The money cash is the same either way. But I think, you talked about self-punishment. Man, I had a lot of that. And it was reinforced by the sales culture that I was in, which I didn't really know any better. It was like, dude, it's just numbers game. Hit the phone, hit the streets, get your 27 no's out of the way before 9 o'clock in the morning and get on with it, right? Which ended up being just a hideously stupid way to try to live my life. But this happens to lots of people. This is such a common story.
Yeah, and I think I can relate to, like, maybe putting up with something for a little while until it becomes too much, until you become fed up, until you realize, okay, well, this sales job, for example, sounded good in theory. It worked out at first, but then I realized that it was not sustainable. So yeah. And so what I'm also getting from you is that this whole concept of, sometimes you have to head into the wind, sometimes you have to go with the current. And you're making me think back to a lot of just, marketers over the years that I've known who, when their business slowed down or their traffic source dried up or their lists got a little bit stale, they gave up. They weren't dynamic. They didn't sometimes push through those times or switch gears or hang on to something that was working. They were just kind of sort of stuck in their own way. So I think that really helps me quite a bit. And I can relate to that is sometimes there's what you think is the shortcut. There's what you think is the easy route. But once you get into it, it makes things unnecessarily complicated. And then we have to maybe take a good hard look at ourselves and what we're doing and untangle a little bit.
Yeah, we do. And one of the, I think, great truths about life is that you encounter situations or there's things you need to learn, and you get in the middle of it, and there's a point where it seems absolutely unmanageable and hideously complex and overwhelming. But eventually you start putting some things together, and then you get to an end point where actually it becomes very simple. And like, this is anything that you've gotten good at, anything that is, a sport or playing a musical instrument. Like, if you pick up the guitar, there's a point in guitar where it just seems like the subtleties and the nuances and the things you have to learn are just endless, even though gee, we're only plucking 6 strings. Like, how complicated can this get? It's like, well, it could get pretty complicated. But then at some point, it starts to become simple again. And then you have hindsight and you can see, oh, there was a path through this thing all along. And here's what it was. And this is what I got to as I got into being a very experienced consultant. Years later, I started seeing these patterns. I started seeing that I was talking to lots of people. They fundamentally had the same problem I had when I was in the Dilbert Cube, working that sales job that ended up failing. And it was, I was trying to sell in a way that was not consistent with my personality. And here's what I mean by that. So I figured out through trial and error that I'm really a consultative problem solver sales guy. I'm not interested in a situation where you just find the guy and you take the order. I don't even find those situations to be that easy anyway. I needed a situation where somebody needed my expertise, somebody needed my sense of a new approach. They needed me to look at their situation and help them figure it out. Well, there's a bunch of different versions of this. So like there's one kind of salesperson, I call him the hostage negotiator. And that's the guy who you could just like, he could parachute into some town, walk into a conference room and like talk his way out of almost anything. And at the end of the meeting, the guy gets the order and he walks out, feeling like $1 million. And somebody says, so what happened in there anyway? And he's like, I don't even remember. I don't remember what I said. I just know, I really like these guys and they really like me. Well, that's one kind of sales personality. Another kind of sales personality is the guy that'll sit in his cave for 4 months and he'll write copy and he'll string together emails and he'll build out this whole big product launch. And when everything's just perfect, he'll finally press the send button and then $1 million will show up. But that guy is a totally different guy than the hostage negotiator, right? Which is a totally different guy than like the guy that edits videos or something. And I started to see these patterns that there are certain kinds of salespeople, there's certain kinds of sales modalities. And if you put the wrong person in the wrong modality, you're just pounding a square peg in the round hole. And it frustrates everybody. And you end up with a huge amount of collateral damage. Like, I think this actually chews people up and spits them out. And it happens to marketers and it happens to entrepreneurs and it happens to salespeople. That everybody has a right environment that they can optimally function in. And if you're in any kind of sales or marketing, you need to figure out what that optimal environment actually is. And then you need to get there as fast as possible. And you need to stop selling in ways that are not compatible with who you are.
That makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of these things that you're talking about. One is that it's all about that journey to unconscious competence, right? That we start off with unconscious incompetence where we don't know what we don't know. And then we slowly figure out, how to pick up that guitar, or how to drive that car, or how to make a web page of any kind, even if it's terrible, or how to send out, that one marketing email once a week, even if it's the worst thing anyone's ever seen. At least you're doing something. And then you get enough repetitions, you get enough mastery so that you get past that 80% point where then things become automatic. You've seen it enough times where you start to see the patterns, kind of like if you see enough movies again and again, you start to realize, oh yeah, all movies are kind of the same. They all sort of follow that same yes, structure. Yes, and then we get to that point where we can kind of think more big picture and keep things simple, and sort of like the whole story of like, Steve Jobs coming back to Apple and they had built out all these product lines and all these things. And he was just like, no, on the whiteboard, he drew 2 lines and said, we're going to have 4 quadrants and we're going to sell one thing in each quadrant, and just, getting rid of all the stuff, separating the forest from the trees. And then that whole concept that you laid out there about finding the best fit for you, I could really relate to that, especially because it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking we need to beef up some of our weaknesses, right? We think that from, maybe from school or something like that, we think that we need to be this sort of well-rounded person and have all these extra skills. But, that's what outsourcing's for. That's what building a team and hiring employees are for. So maybe we should focus on what our strengths are and not our weaknesses. If we're more introverted, if we're good making these web pages or good making these videos, maybe we should just do more of that and stop beating ourselves up so much about those things that we don't do.
So the 80-20 speaks to this directly, and you're absolutely right. What most people don't know about 80-20 is there's another 80-20 inside every 80-20. So 80-20 started when Vilfredo Pareto, an Italian economist 100 years ago, figured out that no matter what country he looked at, no matter what their economic system was, it was still about 20% of the people owned 80% of the wealth, and the other 80% of the people had 20% of the wealth, which, if you work that out, it means the haves have 16 times more than the have-nots. Well, this is universally true. It's all over the place. It's true in your sales reports. It's true of product lines. It's true of customers. It's true of product defects. It's true all across many different dimensions of life. Well, what most people don't know is there's an 80-20 inside every 80-20. So when you take the 20% who own 80% of the wealth, 20% of them own 80% of that wealth, and 20% of them own 80% of that wealth. And this is also true with salespeople and product lines and everything. Well, so this gets me to the point, which is it's also true of talents and abilities. So the 20% of your talents that produce 80% of your results, there's 20% of that. Like there's a subset. Like if you're a good writer, there's a 20% of what you write, how you write, and why you write that produces 80% of the 80% of your readers, which is 64. So that means 4% of the writing produces 64% of the reading. So if you pour your effort, your training, your money, your investment, your sweat into making yourself even better in that narrow aspect of what you know and what you do, then you'll find that you get huge compound interest. If you're a good writer, then being a better writer is actually comparatively easy. Where if you're bad at making cold calls, trying to get better at making bad cold calls, it could be that all you do is just be really good at making bad cold calls, right? And so there are these tiny elements of your skill set that can be hugely invested in, and they'll produce enormous results.
That's really deep. That gives us a lot to think about. And I mean, I can relate to this quite a bit because I'm somewhat of a computer programmer. I used to crank out lots of plugins and things like that. And then for a while, I felt like I needed to switch gears and focus more on like the podcasting and on courses and things like that. And I wasn't as fulfilled. And it felt like over that period of time, my customers weren't as maybe excited, or they weren't paying as close attention as when I was focusing on kind of the computer programming, which is where I really shined a lot. And so one thing that I've been really kind of curious relating to 80-20 these days is, do you have anything to say about maybe some of those invisible factors? So for example, let's say that there's some internet marketer out there and they have like a website and a blog, and they say, well, doing the blog on its own doesn't fuel my business, but then I'm worried that if I back off on the blog, if I delete it or I stop updating it, that will no longer fuel some of the other stuff that allows me to focus on my own 20%. So does that ever come to mind for you, or just any thoughts there about when you're cutting that 80% that doesn't work? Is there anything that like invisibly fuels the whole rest of that business there?
So I've found that anytime a business works, there is like where you can scale it up and you can make it big. There's always a early indication from something really small that happened that indicates that this could continue. Okay, so like for example, lots of people have this idea, like they have an idea, and they go, "Oh, I got this, I've got this great idea for this device that people could use in their shower, and they would use it every morning, and it would solve this huge problem, and this is how they should do it." And it always starts as a pure idea, and then they build it, and they spend all this money on it, and then they can't manage to sell it. Whereas there's an awful lot of things that go on to become very popular products where they started out as, well, you had this thing and it didn't work. And so, well, you went into the garage and you got out your hammer and your chisel and your saw and you concocted something, and look, now I got a solution. And then somebody sees that and they go, "Hey, I want one of those." And it was the necessity is the mother of invention thing. And so it was like, if your neighbor came over and he saw what you did and he goes, "Hey, how do I get one of those?" That's probably something that's going to work. Now, I think coming to your question, what I have seen is that if you have something that's fundamentally a good idea, there are micro indications already that it's good. Like you put up a blog or you did a podcast and maybe you've got a small following. However, the people that are listening or the people that are reading are giving you rave reviews because they really like, "Man, I was waiting all my life for somebody to actually say that, and you're the first person who actually did." Now, so I don't know if I'm nailing your question, but hopefully we're in the vicinity. Like if you're on the fence of like, well, should I keep doing this blog thing, or am I just beating my head against the wall? Well, what's the positive response that you're getting, and why are you getting that positive response? And a lot of times it's just there's a little bit of feedback that we didn't get. And if we added that in, we would know where to direct this thing. A lot of times we don't know where things are going until we get out there and we tinker with things and that's where the market really wants to go. And so some of us get stuck inside our own heads. So does that put us any closer to what you're asking about here?
I think it does. Like what I'm getting from your answer here is that we all need to remember to focus on what our customer wants and what gets them excited. And you always hear that phrase, people voting with their wallets, and the thing that maybe energizes you and might take 3 years of your life writing or creating might end up being a total dud. But if you can find a way to do some kind of proof of concept or some kind of just like get something that's not perfect, but it's functioning and it's up and running so that people can see it and they can use it, whether that's the website, the blog, the physical e-commerce product, wherever that is, get it to the point where other people can get excited about it. And then that way we get that reassurance that we're solving a real problem, we're meeting a need, and then those other people's excitement can encourage us instead of us being stuck in a box and like you said, getting stuck in our own head. So it's like we need to find that early indication and get other people involved so it's not just us. That does help.
Well, that's right. And let's say that you have a problem, which is, well, a prototype is going to cost $100,000 or something like that. Well, there's something else that you can do even when you don't have a prototype is you can go show somebody the idea, and you can say, if you'll write, it'll take me a year to make this thing, but if you'll write me a check today, I'll give you 60% off. Well, I have entire companies that I wouldn't have started if I had done that test first. Like, I started a company about 7 years ago. It was called Fanalytics, and they did then what Facebook Audience Insights does now, basically. Okay. And we had figured out these ways of extracting this data, and we were building this software. And we went around and we started talking to people about it. And everybody said, wow, that's awesome. And when it was finally working and ready, we went back to all the people that said it was awesome, and nobody would actually write a check for it. They only thought it was a cool idea. Okay. And the company failed. I mean, I ended up losing a lot of money on this thing. Okay, if I had gone out and I said, and I showed them, show them my PowerPoints and screenshots and all this other stuff, and said, this isn't working yet, but when it's working, this is what it will do, right? Cobble together. I mean, we did have this like early prototype thing that we did have, but, and it didn't cost $50,000, right? But it just demonstrated the idea. If I had said, if I can't get somebody to write a check at a big discount before I start this, I'm not starting it at all. If I had done that, it would have saved us a ton of wasted effort. So maybe that's something that people can do out there. If they really want it, they will write a check. And that is your proof of concept right there, is getting the check.
And that's a good insight, that there might be the thing that excites you, there might be the thing that excites other people, but unless they're willing to pay the money for it, even if it's at that deep discount because it's not yet created, then they need to spend the money. There needs to be that proof of concept right there, where just people getting excited about it is not enough. People could get excited about coupons, but they won't. You won't know if something's a hit unless they pay for it. And I'm sure you've come across this too. Like, sometimes not only is the thing that you're excited about kind of the dud, but also sometimes something really takes off and you have no idea why. Just like you're like, I had no idea that people wanted a speech about this, or they really love the chapter in this book or this blog post or the software. It's like, I have no idea why everyone loves this, but they do. So then that's kind of the thing to follow.
The world is more and more that way. As a matter of fact, the world is increasingly chaotic, where it's actually getting harder and harder to predict the future based on the past. It's harder to predict what product is going to go viral tomorrow based on what went viral today. And so that makes experimentation with actual things, actual people, and not merely talking to people and asking for their opinions. It makes it triply important because, well, so one of the advanced topics that I talk about with some of my estudiantes is that the world isn't really even 80-20 anymore. It's more like 95-5. 5% of the Facebook posts get 95% of the likes and shares, and 5% of the products and websites get 95% of the traffic. And that is actually true. Okay. So that means what most people are looking at is a 5% success rate with whatever brand new idea that comes out. So 20 pitches of the baseball, you get 18 strikeouts, you get one double, and you get one grand slam. That's really about how the world works now. And so you need to get to the strikeouts and determine that they are a strikeout as fast as humanly possible. Now, I was always afraid to do that because now you're up against that moment of reality. We can protect ideas inside our head and we can tell a story about how great it's going to be, but it's a whole nother matter when the day of reckoning actually comes.
Sure. Yeah, and we see that again and again, and it's easier to see it in someone else than see it in yourself. But we're all guilty of that, right? Of having our foot on the brake, of saying, I'm married to this really good idea, and if I market it and get it out there and get it finished, it'll get to that point where I'll know if it's a winner or if it's a loser. And sometimes we're too maybe emotionally invested in that idea to get it to that fork in the road, right?
That's right. So, fail fast, ask for a check first. And look, when somebody does write you that check, then you're off to the races. And, it's amazing how many business ideas take off because one or two or three credible people or credible customers or credible clients were willing to write that check and bet on it early on. And even in the most discouraging environment. So let me give you an example of this. So I have a major project I've worked on for quite a few years called the Evolution 2.0 project, and it's literally a science and biology book. It's different from all of my other marketing stuff, and I started getting really interested in this about 14 years ago, and I realized that there's this giant gap in our scientific knowledge, and I put together a technology prize. Right now that prize is $5 million. It's the largest technology prize on HeroX.com, which is Peter Diamandis's website for outsourcing science problems. And so I had to get this thing started. And so I pitched investors for about 2 years before I finally got somebody to say yes. And then once I had one yes, then the second yes became, and these guys had to pledge $1 million. When I got to the second yes, the second yes was a lot easier than the first one. In fact, I would say that getting the first yes was about a third of the effort, if not half. And then the same was true with getting judges. So I'm an electrical engineer and I'm a consultant and I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm not a scientist. But I'm trying to put together a prize that scientists would take seriously. Well, so I got one early adopter. It was a guy named Dennis Noble, who's a professor at Oxford in the UK, and he came on board. And once I had one judge, it was easier to get a second judge. I got a second judge, and then the third judge was the leading geneticist at Harvard Medical School. And I was having a conversation with Larry Kim, the founder of WordStream. Maybe a lot of people wouldn't know who Larry is out there, but he sold his company for $130 million about 6 months ago. So, he's not doing too bad. And he said, starting WordStream was exactly like that. Like most of these things, they start as an idea on a napkin. And, can I get anybody to buy into this idea? And then I finally get somebody buy into it. So the thing bumps forward, it lurches forward. Like, okay, so we got some movement here. So now where does it go? And you piece these things together experimentally, so how does a guy start with an idea on a napkin 10 years ago, and then suddenly in 2018, he's selling the company to the parent company of USA Today for $130 million? Well, it's in this exact stepwise fashion. The thing is you can't engineer all the steps in advance. A lot of times you're just shooting in all kinds of different directions at every step of the way until you find, oh, okay, I guess we're going here. And oh, okay, I guess we're going here. And so It's this incremental, experimental way of doing business, doing life. And if you can be okay with failing 90% of the time, you're going to hit some grand slams. It won't be a grand slam every time by any means, but you'll consistently get the occasional grand slam. And then we see that person that did that, and all of a sudden they're worth $10 million. You go, wow, that guy got lucky. It's like, well, no, I wouldn't call it luck.
Yeah, it's like they took 10 years to get to that overnight success. And that hearing that sort of thing is really encouraging to me, because if you think about like the paths that you could possibly take to get from point A to point B, where point B is you have this really successful business or you sell a company. It's like if that graph looked like just slow and steady progress and just constantly working, that doesn't sound like fun. And then if the graph looked like nothing, boom, one day win the lottery, that doesn't sound like fun. But what does sound like more of, say, an encouraging adventure is to hit these, get these milestones, right? You take some quick action, you get a few people involved in this, and you get a few things figured out. And then, as you said there, it's like you have a little bit of randomness and that chaos, but as things begin to kind of take form, then your own journey and your business pulls you in a weird, unexpected direction, but you just get to better and better milestones. It's not just it's not just the effort, and it's not just getting lucky. It's kind of like a mix of things, right? Course correction.
That's right. And you can't, here's why you can't predict the next breakthrough. So, the whole world is running on Moore's law now, which says that computers double in speed every 2 years and the price goes down. Well, so that's awesome, right? Well, so where did computers come from? Well, before they were transistors, they were vacuum tubes. So what made the computer possible was vacuum tubes. But you know what? Nobody could have possibly anticipated a computer looking at the vacuum tube the first day the vacuum tube came out. They were using those for radios. Radios are analog. They're not even digital. They weren't even using the vacuum tubes to switch things on and off in the radios. They were using them for analog. So, but somebody realized, hey, there's this thing I can use this for. And that's the way progress is actually made. It's usually serendipitous. So it's a lot more important to be paying really close attention to what's going on around you than to be, quote unquote, inventive. And so the question is, okay, so are you paying attention? Are you paying attention to what's working? My experience is most people aren't actually paying that much attention to what is working. They're paying attention to the squeaky wheel. So, for example, here's another 80-20 thing. One of the consequences of the fact that 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers and 80% of your attention is focused on things that only generates 20% of your results is everybody who has any size of a business have customers that are super reliable. They're quiet as a mouse. Every now and then they need something and they just order it. They don't bother your customer service people. They don't bug your salespeople. They don't complain about anything. They just buy your stuff and disappear. Usually those customers get ignored. Nobody talks to them. Nobody visits them. They just take them for granted. It's almost like they think, well, if I pay too much attention to this guy, I might jinx it. Well, that guy is the most likely to give you even more business if you did give him attention, or you went in there and was like, so what else do you guys do around here? And he starts telling you, like, oh my goodness, we could help you this way. We could help you this way. And he's like, wow, great. Like, where have you been all my life? You should try that. And then everybody has customers that they really ought to fire. Now, you can fire them and be mean about it if you really, really want to, but I don't think you need to. You can be very nice. You can send them a letter, say, hey, we've been reworking our business and going in some new directions. And sorry, next year we're not going to be able to do your taxes. And so we have a list of suggested vendors, and we'll fully assist you in transferring your account over to them because I think they can serve you better. And you just got rid of a customer that only pays you 10 hours worth of money, but racks up 30 or 40 hours worth of maintenance time or support time or whatever. And so so yes, your revenue goes down, but your expenses go down a lot more and your profitability goes up. And now you're running a more profitable business with less time. And that's 80-20. That's what 80-20 is all about.
That's really powerful. Looking at those two extremes and what you said there about how we should pay attention to what's working, that's a really simple concept, but I wrote that down and I'm definitely going to apply that because you're so right. There are those things that are just working smoothly, that are the easiest parts of our business, and maybe we should be expanding, enlarging that, and not focusing on some of that time wasting stuff. And I mean, I think a lot of us have customers like that where, there's this handful of this really dream customers. They're super low maintenance. They buy whatever I put out. They use it. They get results. And then I think now that I think about it, I've been afraid to jinx it, right? To kind of kill the goose that lays the golden egg.
Right.
And so yeah, and that's super easy for us to do, especially if we're coming to the end of the month or the end of the year. Look at the books. Look at those those top 10 or those top 50 buyers who buy all the stuff. Why not send them a quick thank you card, or why not figure out what else they'd want, or what else they'd want you to create? I mean, it's super simple concept for you laying it out like that, but I think that's a real missing piece in a lot of our businesses. And then on the other extreme of that, those bad customers, right? Those high maintenance customers that are just a lot of work and they put in very little money, and it's maybe like a kind of a Ben Franklin syndrome kind of thing, where the more you help someone, the more you're inclined to help them again and again, and you end up a little bit messed up in the head from that, right? Because it's like you're bending over backwards to try to please these kind of unpleasable, unhappy customers, and there's not a lot of them, but there are definitely a few of them at that extreme that we could definitely get rid of, and then focus on those people who do love us, so that way it's a better relationship. So, I mean, you've given us a heck of a lot to think about in terms of life, in terms of our business, in terms of our time management, and lots of things like that. And I want to make sure that as we're winding down, that people know about all the cool stuff you have going on. I know you have the 80-20 book, you have this Evolution 2.0 thing. So what do you think people should know about when it comes to your websites, your resources, and where should they go after listening to our conversation today?
If you go to perrymarshall.com/8020, you'll find the book 80-20 Sales and Marketing, and Amazon sells it for $18. In the US, we sell it for a penny plus shipping, which adds up to $7. So you're actually saving money. We give you some bonuses on the website that don't otherwise come with a book, and you'll be able to watch how our email system, our upsells, the choreography actually works, which you can learn a great deal by studying. And that book will totally change the way that you see everything. You'll never see the world itself the same way again, because you'll see how cause and effect chain together in a way that you never saw before. And you'll start recognizing all these patterns. And when you can recognize major patterns in your work and in the universe, it's a giant step forward. And you'll be able to much more easily solve any kind of business problem and recognize, hey, there's a disproportionate problem here. There's a disproportionate opportunity here. I can focus on this. I can ignore everything else, and I can actually make more by doing less.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a much needed resource, because if we don't see those patterns, then we're probably repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And that's not good because time is finite. You only have a few decades until you're dead forever and you can't get that time back. So why not figure out what's working, what's not working, and what things should remain the same or what things should change in order to get to where you need to go. So the place for that is perrymarshall.com/8020. That's perrymarshall.com/8020. So check out that book. Like Perry said, a penny plus shipping, so $7. And if you got anything out of this conversation today, you owe it to yourself to take things to the next step and grab that book because you need to fail fast. Money loves speed. You need to get that incremental progress, and perrymarshall.com/8020 will get you where you need to go. So we'll see you over there at perrymarshall.com/8020. And thanks, Perry, for literally blowing our minds in more ways than one and giving us a new way to think about some of our past mistakes, obstacles, successes. I think that it helped quite a bit. So thanks for that.
Robert, thanks for having me on. It was a real pleasure, and I'm honored to be on your show.
Did you leave us a quick review on iTunes yet? It's quick and easy. Just go to marketeroftheday.com/iTunes, click the View in iTunes button, and we would be very grateful.